Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of Breaking the Blocks. I'm Rachel Pearman, your host. And if you're watching us on YouTube, I would love it if you would please give me a ding, thumbs up, if you would subscribe to the channel and perhaps leave a comment below. Do you know why? Because this tells the algorithm that you're interested in the content. And that means the algorithm pushes us out to other people. And if you're getting something out of these interviews, you never know, someone else might find inspiration in them as well. So we're all helping each other. So if you would do that, I would really appreciate it. But thank you so much for being here. I wonder if you're learning as many lessons from all of these incredibly creative people that I'm talking to as much as I am. Now, I learned something in particular today from my guest, Cindy Grisdela, and that was to never judge a book by its cover. Because within the first few minutes of Cindy and I talking together, she told me about a job she had done before she became a full-time artist. And I would never have guessed that she would have done this job. She also talked about the mistake that she made when doing this job and the lessons that she learned from it. So I think what we can take is don't judge anybody on their appearances, always delve a little deeper, and that mistakes happen in life, but we can always learn from them. And the mistakes give us wisdom as we navigate our way through our own journeys. Let's sit back and listen to Cindy and find out what that job was that she did. Well, hello, lovely Cindy Grisdela. Grisdela. I always think I'm going to talk to an Italian lady. Grisdela, Cindy Grisdela.
I'm good. No, I'm not Italian.
But Cindy, so obviously you just said there you are not Italian. So are you full American? Because it's interesting when I talk to Americans, there is so much history in terms of where people's families originated from. I mean, just down the road from me where I live, there is a town called Boston. And that is where the original people went over to America, which is amazing.
Yes, I am fully American, and my maiden name is Samuels. I took my husband's name when I married, and that's where the Grisdela comes from. A long time ago, I am originally from Florida in the United States. Grew up there and was born and raised. Moved to Virginia outside Washington, D.C., where I live now about 40 years ago.
Washington, D.C. I have never been there. I would like to go there. Do you like living in Washington, D.C., or do you see yourself moving away at some point?
Well, that's an interesting question because I went to college in Virginia, at the College of William and Mary. I didn't think that I would stay. I come from a university town in Florida, but a fairly small town. But I thought, you know what? I'd like the experience of living in a city or near a city because I've never done that before. So I moved to DC after college and intended to stay for, just a few years, get some experience maybe, and then go back. And that, as I said, was 42 years ago. So yes, I've loved living here. I've never actually lived in the city. Last Saturday after our Thanksgiving, my husband and I went down to the National Gallery of Art, and we saw this amazing Mark Rothko exhibit that was just fabulous. And the things that are available to us here, the museums, the art galleries, the history of our country is just really interesting to me.
Yeah, so that suits you. Do you find inspiration in art galleries? Where do you find your inspiration from? Because I'm going to ask you in a second, Cindy, about your national park adventure. But do you find kind of, culture and city culture inspirational for you and your lovely quilting? Because your quilting is very vibrant and you use beautiful colors.
Thank you. I'm an art history major in my undergraduate degree, and so I feel like I am inspired by art and artists. I always have been. Mostly, though, it's a color sense. Rothko, for example, has this amazing sense of vibrant colors that just bounce off of one another, and being able to see things like that in person is just really I don't know, that's hard to explain. It just really sort of fills me up, I guess. But I'm also inspired by nature. I live on a little lake, and I have wildlife and weather and things that happen outside my door. So my work is abstract, so I can be inspired by absolutely anything.
tell me about your national park adventures, because I need to know now, Cindy. When I last spoke to you, I think you said you had, how many are there? Are there 52 national parks?
There are 63 now.
So, and how many have you done?
63. We did it. We did it. Yep.
Yeah.
The last two were above the Arctic Circle in Alaska. And my husband and my older son and I went there in July this year. And when we started out, there were 47 national parks. So there were ones added, and it's really exciting to have been able to finish it.
Yeah, so it's like you've achieved a goal, isn't it, really? I guess.
Yes, my husband is a goal setter, and so so that was the goal. It took us 27 years.
That's amazing. You must have a fantastic photographic library. I mean, have you taken lots of photographs, or is it just a case of you've lived in the moment and it's all been kept in the mind?
No, I love to take photographs. Back in the day, I took photographs with an actual camera, and some of those photographs aren't as great, but so yeah, I have some amazing photographs.
So you mentioned, Cindy, that your husband is the goal setter of the family, but do you set goals for yourself?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I really don't. My approach is to take advantage of opportunities that come my way, like, you know, Rachel reaching out to me and says, "Hey, do you want to be part of Crafty Monkeys? Do you want to do this podcast?" And I say yes. I try to say yes as much as I can, and doing that, taking advantage of opportunities that I mean, I have sort of overall goals. I wanted to write a book, then I wanted to write another book, and so things like that. But usually it's just a little less structured, I guess.
So when these opportunities are presented to you, do you feel fearful of them? If it's something that you'd like, for example, maybe the first time you were on a podcast or the first time you worked online, do you feel fear? And if you do, how do you overcome that fear? How do you kind of get yourself into the mindset to say, well, I'm going to try it anyway? Because clearly you do try these things.
That's a really deep question. And it's got a little bit of an interesting answer because I am an introvert. Putting myself out into the world is a little bit difficult for me. I don't want to say no to things because I'm afraid, because then the opportunity is lost and you don't grow. And so when I was, this is, maybe more history than you want to know, but I was an art history major in college, but I have never worked as in art history in a museum or anything. When I came to DC, I got a job at a financial research company because, that was what was available to me. I ended up parlaying that job into a job as a Capitol Hill reporter for Dow Jones News Service in the Wall Street Journal. And that involved, talking to strangers. That involved, calling people up on the phone and asking them questions that they didn't want to answer. But it was a great experience. I learned so much. And part of what I learned was that, the fear doesn't have to win. You can be afraid of something and do it anyway. And, I ask myself sometimes, what's the worst that can happen? You know, I call somebody up, they say no, or worse, they yell at me. But that's not the end of the world, and I found that it's kind of a strange idea, but I kind of slip into a different skin when I'm doing things that I have to be face forward with. And it's still me, it's authentic, but it just allows me to do the things that might be a little scary without people knowing that I'm scared, right? I mean, does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. You see, I absolutely agree with you about you being an introvert, Cindy, because when I had seen your work, and obviously I reached out to you and said, will you come and do something with us here? And you never know who's going to turn up on the other side of that Zoom meeting. It's always
Right.
interesting. And we're all so unique. And that's what I find fascinating about the world. And sometimes you will meet someone and you both feel, you can kind of feel it, oh, this is not going to work. And that's fine. And
Yeah.
people say, okay, well, thank you so much for your time. Goodbye. Which is what, as you said, it's so important to try these things. But obviously, when I first started talking to you, that's what I noticed about you. I thought, wow, you really are a very quiet person. And yet your quilts are so colourful.
Right.
And I was talking to Varushka from Pride of Joy Quilting about vulnerability. And she was talking about, as an artist, you have to be vulnerable because you are laying
Absolutely.
yourself out there. And it's interesting that you've just said that job for you was really quite frightening and you had to be vulnerable there. So do you think as a person in your personal life that you find it easy to be vulnerable, like with friendships, can you show vulnerability, or do you have to, as you said, slip into a different skin to find that vulnerability within you?
That's a great question too. I think I have to do the second thing. I think I have to, to kind of slip into the different skin. I tell this story sometimes about when I was new at my job as a journalist, and I don't have any training as a journalist. I just knew about this sort of specific financial thing that that they were interested in. I made a mistake, and this was back a long time ago in the 80s. And I made a mistake in a report that I put out. It was a math error. And immediately I started getting calls from people all over the world. You made a mistake. And it was horrifying,
Mm.
horrifying because, making mistakes, nobody likes to make a mistake. But again, I fixed it. It wasn't the end of the world. I in that job, I had to make myself vulnerable. I had to go to interview a public figure and write about it in the moment quickly because I worked for a wire service. So there was no like, going back and, polishing it up. It was a dictation thing. And you had to think on your feet, and you might make a mistake, you might misquote someone, you might, whatever you might do. That was a true vulnerability of putting myself and my words out there. In relationships, I think it's a little hard for me to get close to people sometimes, but I do have, very strong, friendships and relationships with my family and people that I care about. And I've gotten less worried, I guess, about the vulnerability part. I always feel, if I'm going in to give a lecture or teach a class or whatever, I always feel like, oh, I'm nervous beforehand. But you know what? It usually works out fine. And that's just the way it is. My husband used to say when I would go in, like I would be going into a hearing on Capitol Hill with a famous public figure at the time, and I would be nervous about it. And he would say, don't, it'll be okay. I'll worry for you. And I said, no, 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 you won't worry enough. So, but it's
That's
just kind of
brilliant.
it's just kind of a because my husband is not a worrier. He's not an introvert either. And, so it's just, we kind of balance each other out.
Is that who you turn to for support, do you think? Is that your kind of support? Well, I wouldn't say network because it's never just one person, is it? But is your husband the person that you would always turn to?
Yeah, he's my biggest fan and my biggest supporter, and it's really wonderful. My kids are also, I have good relationships with them as well. And recently I have, in fact, I just had lunch with them yesterday. I've got a couple of other fiber artists that live locally, and we meet on a, almost a monthly basis just to talk about art and, and what we're thinking and what we're inspired by. If you had a creative block lately, these women will be the people that I would go to. And so that's really important to me. I have, not huge numbers of friends, but a small group of support people that I rely on.
So you mentioned their creative blocks. So what creative blocks have you experienced then? Because we talked obviously there about, vulnerability and human relationships and work things. But let's talk about your quilting for a few moments now. What sort of creative blocks have you found in your quilting journey, which has been a long one, Cindy?
Yeah, yeah, it has been. I started out as a traditional quilter, making the block patterns that people have been making for hundreds of years. Creative blocks happen to me more frequently now because my work is improvisational and abstract, and I don't have a pattern to follow. I'm making it up as I go along. And sometimes, sometimes it doesn't work. I talk about this a lot in my classes and my lectures. Even though this is my job, I mean, I am an artist who works abstractly, improvisationally, talks about it, teaches about it. This is my job, but it doesn't always work for me, or it doesn't always work the first time. And so you put something up on the wall and you think, ugh, that is terrible. And you just have to keep at it. You have to keep, sometimes I usually have more than one project going at once because, I might get blocked on something and, move on to something else. I recently sort of overcoming a creative block. And one thing that I do is just get into the studio and sew, even if it's not art. It's a baby quilt, or it's some pillows that I want to put in my online shop, or something small. And it's interesting how you spend a few days just picking up fabric, putting it together again without really any pressure, and suddenly the ideas start to bubble again. The important thing, I think, is this is something that I talk about a lot. I feel very strongly that we all have the ability to be creative. We all have a creative voice inside of us. It might not be for art, it might be for cooking or for poetry or for, raising a child. I mean, we all have that ability, but listening to it is something that we lose sometimes. And so that's just a big thing for me.
Yeah, do you know, Cindy, I saw something the other day. I can't remember where the quote was, but someone said, "We are all born creative. And
Yes,
then as we go through life, we lose it." So it's not about gaining our creativity as we go through life. It is about losing the creativity, which is brilliant because that means that we can all regain it. We can all find it again because we
right.
start with it in us. I mean, if you imagine a class of primary school children, they're all painting and colouring and playing. Every single one of them. There is not one child, I don't believe, aged 5, who sits there and says, "I don't know how to do that with a crayon." They just do it. Now, why do you think it is that we lose that creativity in our lives? I mean, obviously, there are pressures in life. We have to pay the mortgage, we have to put food on the table.
I think that's such a great analogy. The children with the crayons. They don't worry about, is it good? Is anybody going to like it? They are just in the moment making that drawing or that painting, or, have their fingers all in the paint. And I think what happens to us is that we get not all of us have the ability to have supportive families or teachers, or, I did, and I'm eternally grateful for it. But a lot of times, other people in our lives, whether it's family members or teachers or other kids even, will say, "Ah, that's terrible. Why are you doing that?" And you start to question yourself, and you lose that, sort of that inner creativity because you become more focused on what the outside world says to you about what you're doing. And what I try to do with my students is to get them to block that out and reconnect with, that creative voice inside of them that says, this is good and I like it. And that's all that has to be said.
Exactly. I think you're absolutely right. And I think particularly in the quilting arena, because, there are so many different types of quilting, and that means that there are so many different people who will have so many different opinions. Somebody will stand in front of, let me just pick two very different people that I've worked with. So, Russell Barrett. Somebody will stand in front of that and go, "Well, I could do that. I could get a tea
Right.
towel
Right.
and sew it
Yep.
in the middle of a quilt." I always say to those people, "But you didn't, did you?" I
Right.
remember I went
Exactly.
to see, I remember I went to see an exhibition at the Tate Modern, and I can't remember which artist it was. It was a really famous artist, and it was just a pile of bricks in the middle of this room. It wasn't, of course, they'd been placed with spatial
Hmm.
awareness,
Of
etc.
course. Yeah.
But I remember talking to my parents at the time, and I think I'd taken them. It was like when I was younger in London, and they stood there, and I think, it was my dad or something said, "What a load of rubbish. I could have gone
Yes.
and got a wheelbarrow and chucked in some bricks." And I said, "But you didn't, did you?" And that's
Yeah.
art. It's
Yep.
just about creating. So, yeah, I think it is difficult for artists though. And that's what I was going to ask you, Cindy. How do you take the ego out of it? Because when you have your quilt on the wall and you get 20 people who say, oh, magnificent, wonderful, magical, love the colours, love the structure, but someone comes along and says, I don't like it. Two things. One, how do we not listen to that one voice when there are 20 who say they love it? And two, how do we take the ego out of it? Because that's our little hurt child inside. How do we get over that and go, well, that's your opinion? Because it is difficult, because you, in a way, are being judged because it's your work. It's such a personal thing to do when you create.
Absolutely. And that is a very, very difficult, it's a very difficult thing. I had, let's see, how am I going to answer this question? Um, so I had that happen to me actually, not too long ago with this group of artists that I got together with, and we, we show each other our work. And I had a piece that I had been working on. It was part of a series and made three quilts, and each one was a little bit different. So I asked my friends, what do you think about this? And they said, oh, Cindy, I don't. I don't think so. You haven't gotten it. And I thought, okay, and I was hurt. I was disappointed. But I took that quilt back and I looked at it and I thought, you know what? There's a lot that I like about this quilt. It might not be a masterpiece. And that's a thing. Not everything any of us make is going to be a masterpiece. And if we come into it thinking that it will, we will be very disappointed. Anyway, for that story, I said, you know what? I like this piece. I'm going to enter it into a regional art show at an art center here locally that, that pulls from the entire Washington metropolitan area, Virginia, DC, Maryland. And it was an art exhibit with painters and photographers and all kinds of other things. And that quilt won Best of Show in that exhibit. And,
Amazing.
and I don't tell that story to toot my own horn. I tell it because I needed to be, either confident in what I had created, or at least willing to put it out there and take a chance. And I'd ask people whose opinion I respect, whose opinion I still respect, and they had a different opinion about it than I did. But I'm fortunate that I have had some success in my career. And so it didn't crush me the way it might have, earlier in my career. And so I think that the best thing to think about there is every piece, whether it's a quilt or a painting or a photograph, you're going to learn from it. It might not be a masterpiece. In fact, most of what you make will not be a masterpiece. But what are you going to learn from it to apply to the next one?
And what did you learn from that, Cindy?
Well, to listen to my own, to my own intuition. Everyone has it. And like I said, not everybody agrees with what you feel about your own work, but that's okay. I mean, I could just as easily have put it in and it wouldn't have been accepted. And then I would have said, all right, well, maybe they're onto something there. The other thing that I do, I put things out on Instagram, see what happens. Sometimes I put stuff out on Instagram and people, either don't respond or they respond not in the most positive way that I had hoped. And I learn from that, and then come back and assess with myself, okay, are they right? Is there something else I need to be doing? Things like that.
Yeah, and you know what? I think what's so important in all of that is to be genuine to yourself. But I think when I was growing the business and I was putting things on Instagram, I was probably thinking, oh, algorithms, trends, da 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 da. And I think actually you can completely lose who you are
Right.
because what you're putting out there, and it wasn't working. And so what I started to do was just to put things out there that I liked, that I felt were funny to
Yeah.
me, that were genuine to me, and things seem to have sort of changed. I was really afraid, Cindy, to talk about mindfulness and creativity, because when I first started this company, one of the things I did was I put on a class that was half a day of mindfulness and then half a day of brush lettering. Not a ticket sold. Had to cancel it.
Oh no.
Now the thing is, that was in the very beginning of the business. No one knew who I was. No one knew what the company did. Hardly any followers. And the people that I was putting it out there to, they were traditional quilters. And I think for them, they just thought, why would I try this? And what's this mindfulness thing? So it was just wrong. But I did have this fear that if I started talking about it again, I would lose the audience. And there are some people who have definitely gone because they're not interested in what we're talking about. Creativity is good for you, etc. But that's fine. And I don't know about you, Cindy, with your children, but I find sometimes that my daughter, who's 18, is wiser than me. Because when I've said to her, oh, I put this out and I lost some followers, she turned around the other day and said, because they're not ready to listen to your message. So let them go and find their own message. And the people who want your message will find you. And that's so true.
It is. It is. Our kids are they're so connected, and they, in a good way, and also maybe in a not so good way. But yeah, I find that with my kids too. And I have a monthly newsletter that I send out, and I get people unsubscribe every month. At first, it was kind of, oh dear, what did I do something wrong? I finally turned that around and thought, no, I want people, if they're not interested, I want them to move on. I want to be talking to people who are interested in what I have to say and what I have to do. As a creative, I mean, I've been, just so impressed and, with what you have created in your business, because we talked several years ago, and, you've just been going and going and going, and it's really impressive. And I think that as creatives, if we embrace things like Instagram and newsletters or whatever, and we're authentic about ourselves. I think that's important, and you can reach people that you would never be able to reach otherwise. But the authenticity of it is crucial. You can't be trying to be someone that you're not, and that's a really important point. I also try to respond when people interact with me on Instagram. I'm mostly on Instagram. When people interact with me, I try to say something back, to have them feel like they're talking to a real person.
But it feels good because that's connectivity, and
Right.
we're all connected. And if you're not connected, then I think you lose out. And just talking about the authenticity, I think that goes for every area of your life. If you are not being genuine, if you're not yourself, you'll get found out. It's interesting that a lot of artists stand there and say, I'm just frightened of being found out, in terms of they're worried that they're not going to be good enough. But I think if you are true to yourself, there is nothing to find out because everything is out there. So I think you have to just go for it.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Don't let the
Yeah.
fear stop you.
No. And I was just going to ask you just a final couple of questions, but I think you kind of answered it really, is what creativity does for you. I mean, I think you kind of answered it in the last question, but is there anything that you would add to that? What does being creative do for you, Cindy, as a person?
Being creative feeds my soul. I mean, I guess that's kind of a cliche, but it has ever since I was old enough to hold a crayon in my hand. But I was fortunate to have parents who supported and encouraged my love of art. I had teachers who did the same, but it was hard. So I've been quilting for a long time, and I've had different sort of approaches to quilting during that time period, from traditional to, a little more contemporary to a lot more contemporary to this whole improvisational thing. And along the way, I lost followers, I lost, clients, customers, because they weren't on board with what I was doing now. They wanted me to keep doing what I was doing. And I feel like as a creative, as an artist, I have to keep pushing myself. I have to keep growing. I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over and over. That doesn't, that doesn't work for me, I guess. And so I think it's important as a creative to be true to my own creativity, to grow and change as an artist, as long as I can. I think it will keep me young.
I think so. I absolutely believe that. I do. People have said to me they think that I'm acting and looking younger now than I did when they knew me 10 years ago, and I believe it, because 10 years
Yeah,
ago my soul wasn't being fed at all. It really was
yeah,
quite barren, to be honest, in what I was doing. And now a lot of the kind of riches have gone, in terms of, we often think, don't we, about material things. I want this, I want this, I want this. And now it's like I can barely afford anything that I used to be able to afford when I was doing the other work that I was doing. But that doesn't I'm so much happier. I'm so much
Yeah.
happier in myself. So, is there anything, Cindy, in your life that has happened that has been very difficult? Don't want to talk about that particularly, but anything that's happened in your life that has been a really difficult period and that creativity has helped you overcome?
I would say, I mean, certainly we all have those periods in our lives, and it makes you question yourself and, what are you really doing with your life? And how could you have made that terrible mistake, or how could that awful thing have happened to you? And I guess I think about it in terms of life is a series of events, and all of the events of my life, the positive ones as well as the negative ones, have made me who I am. That I would not necessarily be who I am without them. Not that I want to embrace the negative things, but creativity, especially now, I am, in the last, I don't know, in the last probably 15 years, creativity's been my touchstone. It's where I go, when I'm happy or when I'm sad. And it helps me to make sense of what's going on, and makes me a better person, I think.
And a final question then, Cindy. Do you have a motto for life?
Yes, I do. I have this, I mean, it's not necessarily a motto for life necessarily, but it's a motto for my creative life. And it's a Picasso quote: inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. So you can't wait for the inspiration to strike. You can't wait for the opportunities to come to you. You need to be in the studio working, or you need to be saying yes to lovely Rachel. Cindy, would you like to be on my podcast? It's really helpful. And I think that's something important for people who don't necessarily feel like they're creative to understand. It's not that I'm inherently more creative than somebody else. It's that I work at it, and I work at it every day. And, and sometimes the work is good and sometimes it's not so good. And, you just keep at it. Keep cutting that fabric up and sewing it together and seeing what happens.
Yeah, well, I tell you something, Cindy. Since I've entered the world of people cutting up fabric and putting it together, it's been a joyous experience. I've met so many amazing people, including you.
Oh, thank you.
And, as I say, to meet someone like you, when I'd seen your work, and then for you to be so humble and, quiet, and it's almost a joy. It's just been really, really nice. So,
Well,
and thank you
thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Yeah, and thank you for taking time to talk to me today. I've really enjoyed it. And there are certainly some great things that we can take, pieces of advice from Cindy Grisdela.
Yes, yes,
You're going to
yes.
be my Italian quilter forever,
Yeah,
even though you're
I
not
can be
Italian.
I can be your Italian quilter. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really excited and looking forward to listening to the podcast when they drop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really do appreciate it. And if you'd like to be involved with the show in any capacity, all you have to do is drop me an email, hello@breakingtheblocks.com. And of course, if you'd like to follow a creative pursuit, if you'd like to learn some of the skills that our guests are talking about, you can in our Zoom classes over on craftymonkeys.com. The details are on the screen right now, or of course, in the bio underneath.